puts the work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
Over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. The punter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
Looks right, fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel.
And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. We're continuing with our head coaching candidate profile series, this time with Don Martindale, Ravens defensive coordinator, presumed by some to be the favorite for the job. Michael, what are your initial thoughts to Don Martindale as the next Jets head coach?
Yeah, he definitely seems like one of those guys who could be one of the more likely candidates, and he hasn't gotten a lot of hype from Jets fans just because of being a defensive guy, and it seems like Jets fans are leaning towards that offensive side, but there's a lot to like about him. What he's done in Baltimore is really impressive. Seems like he has a lot of great leadership skills. So he definitely is a lot more likely, and I also think a lot more intriguing than a lot of fans give him credit for.
Yeah, I think when I first heard him as a potential head coaching option, I was a little bit more weary. You know, generally the offensive coaches are a little bit more sexy, and, you know, there's Eric Bieniemy, and we were talking about Arthur Smith, but I've definitely warmed up to Martindale, especially when you think of guys as a CEO type of candidate. Obviously, there's the connections to Joe Douglas. But let's just hop right into it. I mean, as we've done with all of these candidate profiles, we bring on somebody who knows a hell of a lot more than we do about these candidates. Ken McKusick, 1057 The Fans, film study analyst, covers the Ravens, and he's kind enough to take some time out of his day to join us. Ken, how you doing, man?
Life's good. How are you guys doing?
You know, we're well. I mean, it's always a fun time to be a Jets fan in the offseason because we get to imagine being a good team. And as you know, you cover a good team. So hopefully Joe Douglas can take us to that level. But let's just hop into it immediately with Martindale's scheme, ignoring his potential as a head coach. Let's talk about him as a defensive coordinator. How would you describe his scheme and his philosophy as the Ravens defensive coordinator?
Yeah, he's extremely good. And the Ravens have a great set of defensive coordinators to compare to over their history. And I think he's probably number 2 or number 3 right now in terms of the great ones. Rex Ryan, I think, is probably number 1. And Marvin Lewis, number 2, with Martindale really close in there at number 3. He's been a tremendous scheme guy in terms of the pass rush, marvelous manager of snaps, does a tremendous job of keeping a defense well rested throughout a game. The scheme for pass rush thing is just at a different level with a coach like Martindale. He's got blessed with a couple of outside linebackers who can really cover, and their ability to drop the coverage has been the heart and soul of all the scheme the Ravens have played. There's a lot of deception in the pass rush of 3 major types. They blitz a lot of players from off the line of scrimmage. They run a lot of stunts, and they have the personnel to really do that with players like Wolf and Campbell leading the way there. And then they also have a lot of simulated pressure where they'll drop 2+ from the line of scrimmage when they show you 6. So they do all sorts of things. Any of the 11 players can rush. Really any of the 9 if you drop out the 2 outside corners. But just earlier this year in a game, you guys may or may not know, but the Ravens set the record with having 5 different defensive backs in the same game get a sack. So that gives you an idea of what kind of scheme level we're talking about.
Yeah, and then you mentioned the Ravens have a really good history with defensive coordinators, and Martindale's been there for a while. And before he took over, Dean Pease was running the defense in Baltimore. So who do you think are some of the coaches that he sort of takes after, or at least is similar to, with his defensive approach? And do you think that his philosophy is something he'll take with him to his new team, or that he'll be more adaptive to what the personnel of the team he goes to?
He's extremely adaptive to personnel and to the game plan appropriate to the opponent. He doesn't play just once. The Ravens have been all over the board in terms of how they've adapted, in particular to quarterbacks who get the ball out quickly, quarterbacks who hold the ball a little longer. The New York Giants played him in Week 16, and they had 0 pressures on 13 dropbacks in the first half. And in fact, 11 of those 13 dropbacks were ample time and space, meaning a 3-second pocket was there. The second half, the Ravens turned it all on in terms of numbers, had 18 pressures in the second half, and really dominated that football game defensively. So 6 sacks were included in that second half. But anyway, he's marvelous in-game changer and very much adapts to the quarterback and what they present in terms of an opponent.
Yeah, Ken, and you've mentioned a trait specifically that Jets fans are all too familiar with, which is the ability to adjust, which is something that Adam Gase was It was not a strength of his. And I feel like as a head coach in this league, it's a game of chess. It's just human chess, and the best coaches are able to adjust. And when you mention a specific example of Martindale adjusting in game, that's promising for his ability to be a head coach. What are some of the other traits that I guess Don Martindale has displayed in his time as Ravens defensive coordinator that give you the confidence that he's ready to become a good coach, and not just a good coach, but a very good coach in the league's top market in New York?
He's very much a player's coach, and I think he's similar to Ryan in that way. Also similar to in terms of aggression. I know that was part of your question, Michael. I didn't really answer there, but he's most similar to Rex Ryan of the previous Ravens coordinators. Uh, you know, being a player's coach is good up to a point. He has to be able to be the disciplinarian who can do, as Casey Stengel said, and keep the 15 guys on the fence from siding with the 5 guys who hate your guts instead of the 5 guys who like you. He really needs to be, and that's baseball. Obviously, he's 25. We're talking football; it's different, but I understand that he's going to really need to show the ability to deal with a bad situation, which he really has not had happen in any obvious way in Baltimore. Now, could that be that he's hit it well? Sure, it could be. Could it be that Harbaugh got blamed for them and really had to be the disciplinarian? That could also be, and that's less of the positive trait that you'd like to see in a head coach. You'd like to see it be his choice that he gets sent to the doghouse for whatever behavior is not working.
And what do you think are probably some of the top concerns for him in terms of making that transition to head coach? For me, I think one of my biggest questions would be in terms of the production of his defense, because the Ravens just have so much talent, whether it's in the secondary up front. They have a lot of star players. So a 2-part question, I guess. What are your top concerns for him in terms of becoming a head coach? And then in terms of his defense and their success, how much of a role do you think he plays compared to the talent that they have?
I think he's done a tremendous job of leveraging the talent he has. So I give him a lot of credit there. Um, the Ravens certainly have been blessed with stars, and more importantly, they got a quarterback on the rookie contract. So they spent hardly anything on the offense these last 2 years. And the offense has been very good and it's carried the team in a lot of ways. You don't like that kind of a thing to look at. They obviously wasted some money on Earl Thomas. But otherwise, they've spent their money pretty wisely. I think on defense, they've got a very expensive secondary that is also very good, and that's a good way to do it. It's the Patriots' way of building back to front. As it becomes more challenging and the resources are more strained on defense, it'll be interesting to see what that means for Martindale. If they have to give up on Calais Campbell, or they have to let Matthew Judon go, and who they have left after that. And what he can do with them. I'd be pretty optimistic that he can do things well. And I think you mentioned the connection with Douglas. I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's more likely he ends up in New York than pretty much any other place.
Yeah, how would you describe his coaching style? Do you think, because look, from the owner to the GM Joe Douglas, they've talked about they want a CEO head coaching candidate. They've learned from Rex Ryan to Todd Bowles to Adam Gase, and there's some similarities between Martindale and Ryan that you've talked about. Do you think he can be that CEO? Do you think he can do what Ryan wasn't really able to do in New York, which is not just focus on one side of the football, run the entire team? Do you think he's capable of that?
I think he's a smart guy. I don't know in terms of how he would be as, I say, a game manager, because it's not something he's had to do so far. The game management component of defense that's present in the NFL today is the necessary gambles that defensive coordinators have to take to get opponents off the field with 4-down football. Very difficult to do. Very difficult to get stops with 4-down football. And his gambling style assimilates better to that. But does that mean I really know that he can say when it's the right move to go for it on 4th and 3, or to go for a 2-point conversion down 14 with 3 minutes left? I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced of how he'd be plugged into his analytics people to allow that to happen. I'm not sure.
And then another big aspect of being a head coach is player development. It's something the Jets have really struggled with, getting the most out of their young players. So who do you think are the players in Baltimore under Martindale that best exemplify his ability to develop young talent, get them to hit their ceilings, fit in with the culture they're building? So the young players who are the best examples of positive player development under Martindale.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's the first thing you want in your head coach is being able to know that they can handle the player development component of it. On defense, at cornerback, they've had a very deep cornerback set, but they've still found snaps for some guys who've turned into players. Anthony Averett is just turning the corner now in year 3. Looks like he'll be a good corner. Tyus Bowser in year 4 is turning it on now. They gave Bowser opportunities, and a lot of his failure to step forward in his first 2 years was really Bowser related rather than Martindale related. I think they tried to get him on the field quicker. This year, the rookie Justin Matabike is getting a snap assignment that is proportional to what he's shown on the field, which is really good. And Martindale said, "Go ahead and get rid of Thomas." So do the players, by the way, because we got Chuck Clark, and he can run our entire defense for us. And Deshaun Elliott is the other young player who had to step up into a full-time year after 2 years of injuries. It takes some balls to be willing to take that kind of a gamble, get rid of a veteran player. And I think Martindale had to have a fairly significant say in making that move. So I think if you looked at what young players have succeeded, I don't think you'd have any problem with what Martindale has done with the defense. By the way, that often goes with teams that play highly rotational football. So the Ravens do that, particularly in the defensive line, but they also have a lot of rotation in and out at linebacker where they make exchanges there. And it just fits well that if you have specialists and you realize what all players can bring, it's kind of like being Earl Weaver and managing your 25-man roster very well. You're getting something out of everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I think Greg Williams tried to do in New York, but certainly wasn't able to do the development part that you've talked about with Martindale, because the Jets have certainly gotten plenty of top picks and just haven't been able to develop them on their roster. And that is certainly between that and being a CEO and building a staff. Those are the 3 most important aspects when I look at Martindale as a prospective head coach for the Jets. When we talk about that potential staff, I mean, there's been some rumors about Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator for Clemson. There's been some rumors about his defensive coordinator, maybe going back to Marvin Lewis. What type of staff? I mean, if we're not going to go into specific names, you could if you want, but what type of staff do you think Martindale would try to assemble?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know where he would be in terms of what he wanted in a defensive coordinator. To me, that's the hardest decision for him to make. Does he want somebody who's like him? Does he want somebody who really challenges him and brings in new ideas and wants to run the defense his way? And if he does, can he live with that as the head coach? I really don't have a good idea on that. I suspect there are people on the Ravens that he'd try and bring with him. That kind of worries me a little bit too. The guy on the back end, is a guy Hewitt that I think would be a coach that a lot of people would like to have. If you're going another and on the offensive side of the ball, I think it's much more likely he's going to go for a guy with a pedigree, with a guy who has a real plan in place and maybe some credentials as well to go with it, because he's not going to be as involved in that side of the football, I don't think, other than to be the bad guy when the offensive coordinator needs him to be.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things in terms of whenever you're scouting out a head coaching candidate, at least from our perspective, is to look at some of the biggest games and moments, or even just overall, like we talked about player development, just individual things that kind of showcase that head coach potential. So, and you mentioned actually sort of hit on this question a little bit earlier with the adjustments he made in that one game in terms of his pass rushing approach. So what would you say is a particular game or maybe a player that he's developed, a particular example that showcases his potential to be a good head coach?
I mean, he's extremely innovative as a defensive coordinator. I don't know if that immediately translates to being a head coach because the responsibilities are obviously different. He has to be willing to do other things. But I would point to innovation on defense as something that could translate to other elements of the game, whether it means use of analytics or a really positive view of scouting and not trying to substitute his own judgment for other people within the organization, whoever those might be, the general manager, the other coordinators, his position coaches, whatever. I think if I look at that, the number of different packages he's brought to the Ravens in the last 3 years have been remarkable. The Ravens never played a specific package I'm going to mention in a second called, that I call race car. Other people call it the NASCAR package. There are 4 outside linebackers on the field. They now play it with either 1 or 0 defensive linemen and can be one inside linebacker and either 5 or 6 defensive backs. That package has been remarkable in terms of its success. And you think, oh, they can only play a gimmick package like that so much. Well, in 2018, they played it 6 times and had remarkable results. I don't know how they stopped playing it, but in 2019, they used the base 10.6% of the time. They used the race car, a dime and quarter packages 13.2% of the time. So he's very good about assimilating extreme packages like that and responding in extreme ways to what the opposing team is doing. And I think that's a positive thing that I would take. And I think he could maybe demand that out of his own people more. So if an offensive coordinator, he's not going to be the offensive genius, I don't think, that the offensive coordinator is, but hopefully he could demand that same sort of aggressiveness out of his OC.
And you think that would be kind of his philosophy for his team? Because a lot of defensive coaches, they get hired and they're focused. I mean, the Jets have seen this specifically with Todd Bowles. They're focused on flipping the field position and, ending the drive and a punt is fine. And they're really conservative on going for it on 4th down. But you're talking about Martindale. He's a defensive guy and he's maybe a little bit older, but he's clearly innovative. He's clearly aggressive. Do you think that would be the philosophy of a Don Martindale coach team?
Because we've never seen him have to make an offensive decision. And it's easy also to project it 2 ways. I could project, hey, all that aggression should project positively on offense. I could also say all that aggression means he trusts his defense. He trusts his scheme. And as a head coach, he might trust what he sees out of the defense and not completely understand what he's getting in terms of the offensive side of the ball. So he might say, let's just play this game as a defensive game. Let's win it that way. And that would be a step back in terms of what he can provide as head coach. You want him to be aggressive on both sides of the ball.
Right. If you were Don Martindale's agent and you had to make a pitch to Joe Douglas and Chris Johnson, or maybe even just Jets fans on this podcast, what would be your pitch to sell Jets fans and the Jets brass on Don Martindale as the next head coach of the New York Jets?
Yeah, they took over a situation in Baltimore that was a lot worse than it seemed in 2018. 2017, they just lost the game to the Cincinnati Bengals on 4th and 12. Dean Pease was well known for he did some good assimilation of game plan, but he really was never an aggressive coach of the type Ryan or Martindale are. And a lot of that, I think, really hurt. I think that held the Ravens back. Did not like to play 6 and 7 defensive backs on the field the way Martindale does and Ryan did way back in the day. So that was a little bit frustrating. So he took over a situation where he had to kind of rebuild some things about the defense, change some things about the way the defense was set up. And I think you can look specifically at last year. I think the greatest accomplishment was how that defense was rebuilt on the fly. They effectively, after 4 games, they had no inside linebacker they trusted. They basically said, this is not good enough. We're going to change on the fly, bring in some veterans who know what they're doing. And they got Josh Bynes, LJ Fort, not big names. Guys who've been in the league for a number of years, really not played that much. Bynes had been a starter in Arizona, briefly in Baltimore as well. But they came back and they were outstanding, and they were just the glue that the defense needed. In addition, they got an outside linebacker in Ward who really helped them. They figured on the fly that Chuck Clark was the guy to be the defensive signal caller. I think all of those adjustments that made the 2019 defense so great are what I'd point to in terms of successes to pitch Martindale as a coach in New York. And I don't think that's a difficult pitch at all.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And as we talked about at the beginning, I think the idea of Don Martindale being the head coach of the Jets has certainly grown on a lot of people. And it'll be curious to see if they haven't even offered him an interview yet. I mean, he was the presumptive favorite, I guess, in our eyes going into January, but he hasn't gotten an interview yet. I would expect that to change. I agree with you. I think he'd be a tremendous candidate, at least to get an interview, get him in a room with Douglas and find out a lot of those questions that we had to speculate on. What would be his philosophy? What type of staff would he build? But certainly an intriguing candidate. That question though, can he take the transition from being a top tier defensive coordinator into a top tier head coach? Ken, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on the podcast. Let our listeners know where they can find you.
Thanks, guys. Website I run is filmstudybaltimore.com, and we've got all sorts of Ravens content. Some great technical articles on the offense and defense go up every week. Some of the most technical podcasting you'll find is right there as well.
Don Martindale, ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you think. Tweet us at CYJPod on Twitter. You can follow myself at Ben W. Blessington. You can follow Michael at Michael_Nania. You can find our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, JetsXFactor.com. Certainly an intriguing candidate, perhaps the favorite. We'll see if he gets an interview.
And it's Quentin Williams this Jets.
Over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. Under the beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
Looks right, fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.